Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Arizona Gives workshop, Fuel Your Fundraising with Pro Bono. I'm Karina Ye Hilliard. I will be your facilitator for today. Just want to remind you that you will be on mute for the duration of this session, except if we have specific moments where you can unmute to ask any questions. Should you have any questions in the meantime, though, feel free to drop them in the chat box. If you are hearing impaired or want subtitles, we have provided transcription for you, and you can access them by clicking the closed captioning icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Tomorrow, we will be sending out an email with a link to the recording of this session, a copy of any handouts or resources that are mentioned, as well as a transcription of whatever's put in the chat box. So don't worry about taking super fast notes in case you miss anything. It'll be sent to you tomorrow. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today. Kimberly Swartz is the Senior Manager of Community Engagement at Taproot Foundation. She is a social change professional with 8 years of experience in marketing, communications, community building, and project management. As Taproot Foundation's Community Engagement Lead, Kimberly heads their community outreach and engagement efforts with demonstrated skills in strategy, email marketing, and relationship building. So welcome, Kimberly.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off by sharing my screen. So hopefully that is popping up on your screens okay as well. Yes. Thanks so much for joining the event today. I'm really looking forward to getting to learn more about you and your organizations. So please definitely introduce yourself. Org name in the chat. I'm really looking forward to connecting with you. And since the Winter Olympics are very much on my mind right now, I would also be curious to hear about your favorite Winter Olympic sport to watch on TV or participate in. Either one works. For me, I love watching anything related to skiing or snowboarding because I have tried both of those things and it makes me respect and admire what those athletes are doing even more. All right, thanks for kicking us off, Karina. I'm going to go ahead and get us rolling because we have a lot of great content to work through today. So just to start, Karina already did a lovely job introducing me. Thank you so much for those nice words. I work at a nonprofit called the Taproot Foundation. So before I dive into kind of content agenda for today's webinar, just a little bit more information about what we do here at Taproot and why I'm leading this presentation today. So the Taproot Foundation drives social change by leading, mobilizing, and engaging professionals in pro bono service. Since the early 2000s, we've partnered with over 9,000 nonprofits and over 24,000 business professionals, connecting them for in-kind services totaling around $260 million. So in addition to Taproot's own pro bono programs, we also regularly connect and work with leading companies and corporations around the world to deliver CSR consultancy work. And we lead a global pro bono network and are really committed to advancing this movement of getting folks involved and sharing the skills they're really great at with nonprofit organizations like yours. So during today's event specifically, we're going to be talking about how pro bono support can really help fuel each stage of your fundraising process. And with that, I'll be sharing some recommendations around projects that you can dive into with volunteers through Taproot's network or your own networks in advance of Arizona Gives Day. And then I'll spend a couple minutes just talking briefly about how you can access some free support through Taproot, and we'll save a healthy amount of time at the end for Q&A. So if any questions pop up as we're going, definitely use that chat box. I'll try and keep up with it as we go, but if not, I'll definitely make room to answer your question at the end of the event. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and get us rolling. So as I mentioned, Taproot, we're a nonprofit. We were founded back in 2001, really with the knowledge that there's a huge resource gap present in the social sector. So organizations may very well have solutions for those most pressing social challenges, but they don't have the financial means to really carry out those missions or programs to the fullest extent. there's a gulf between what for-profit organizations can spend on internal infrastructure and staff development and marketing and their website versus what nonprofits are able to invest. And this ultimately impacts nonprofits' bottom lines, which is the mission that we're delivering to community members. And this year, as well as last year, nonprofits have had to operate more leanly than ever, meeting rising community needs while largely dealing with decreased access to hands-on volunteer support, canceled fundraising events, and more. So to put it simply, most organizations tackling social problems don't have the access to the resources, funding, or staff expertise needed to fully accomplish that vital work. And that lack of ability to invest in ourselves really saps our ability to build strong and resilient and sustainable organizations. And due to global crises and changes in individual giving, charitable organizations are feeling this strain more than ever, while being pushed to get really creative with how we bring in financial as well as in-kind support for our missions. And this is where Pro Bono can help. So Taproot Foundation bridges the nonprofit resource gap through connections with skilled volunteers who provide their tech, marketing, HR, data, strategy, or finance experience pro bono. During today's webinar, we're specifically going to address how pro bono support, skilled volunteered support is another way to put it, from the private sector can apply to a very unique nonprofit need, being fundraising, specifically Arizona Gives Day fundraising. And thanks so much for the folks who are chiming in on the chat, introducing themselves. I was mesmerized by the team ice skating and ice dance competition the other night. So I agree, that's a great one. So I'm going to pause here for just 1 second because I've used the term pro bono a few times. And often when people hear it, they immediately think of legal, but it's really so much more than that. So pro bono is donated professional services that benefit organizations or individuals that are working to improve society. So Taproot's programs focus on the areas of marketing and communications, HR, finance, tech, data, strategy, etc. Through a study that we completed with the Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, CECP, Taproot has determined that the average value of an hour of pro bono service is around $195. We found that on average, pro bono projects take around 30 hours of volunteer time to complete, which means that your nonprofit is looking at donated services amounting to around $6,000 per pro bono project that you request and then complete with a volunteer. So I just want you to keep that number, keep that in mind as we're moving through today's event, because when we say that pro bono can be a really valuable resource and keeping in mind volunteers could be a great addition to your team to bring in, I really, really mean it. By infusing the use of pro bono support throughout your departments, development, but also marketing and communications and programming, evaluation, you can save money on your bottom line while in building capacity and longer term stability and being able to save some budget so you can continue to put that towards your programs. Or put that towards hiring more staff members down the road, potentially. So why turn to pro bono? Why turn to volunteers to build fundraising capacity? I'll touch on a few of these things, but again, we're going to send out this recording. We'll send out these slides tomorrow. And so even if I breeze through a slide, you'll still get all of this great information sent to you later on. So first way I would kind of convince you to think about this as a really great resource to leverage at your organization would be getting the right expertise in-house. I want to be completely transparent with you during this event. Skilled volunteers from the corporate world will not be able to step in and independently run a fundraiser for you. That is a very specific nonprofit sector skill. However, that being said, volunteers from the corporate world can help you build your capacity to do fundraising more successfully and more frequently, potentially. So even your amazing team members can't be experts at everything. So getting that seasoned marketing strategist or copywriter or SEO expert can be a really great way to complement skills that already exist on your team. That way, you all, your staff members or board members, can focus on the tasks that you feel really great at that give you energy versus pour you out. And instead, you can bring in those experts to kind of fill those knowledge gaps. My other reason you'll see here is that you can make really, really great connections with folks. Those of you who already rely on volunteers, maybe in-person ones or volunteer support from board members, you know that they're invaluable in the extra hands they supply. However, sometimes in-person or hands-on volunteers might not get the opportunity to quite understand and appreciate your full mission. However, oftentimes a pro bono project, just because of the scope and maybe the strategy that's involved, it requires the business professional to really get to know and understand your work at a fairly deep level. And as a result, you can create lasting supporters through a pro bono experience. I can't say 100% of these volunteers will stay on for multiple projects or provide financial support down the road, but they may. I've heard countless stories of nonprofits who've worked with a volunteer who's gone on to become a board member, gone on to become a longtime funder, gone on to become sometimes even a staff member at their organization because they really fell in love with your mission during that initial pro bono engagement together. It's also a great way to show off to other supporters who are already in your network how resourceful and scrappy you are. By celebrating, hey, we brought in a pro bono consultant to do XYZ for us. It shows your existing supporters, wow, they are really making the most of any financial support or donations we're giving them because they're digging through their network and they're making use of all kinds of creative resources. And that speaks to that last bucket, do more with less. Pro bono really allows your organization to accomplish more from your fundraising efforts without breaking your budget. So for instance, rather than having your executive director who is not experienced with social media run a digital crowdfunding campaign for Arizona Gives Day, instead, you could work with a volunteer who's expertly skilled at each component of creating and pulling off that campaign, from the copywriting to the graphic design or the social media management, etc., freeing up your executive director's time to work on things they are incredibly skilled at instead. This is also a great way, pro bono is a great way to engage board members in more broad resource raising for your organization. Thinking about how they can tap into their own professional networks to bring in some in-kind resources, some making use of their social capital to bring in financial as well as in-kind resources. All right, with all of that in mind, I hope I've sold you and explained what pro bono is and kind of the value of it. So now I want to get into specific examples of how volunteers can support nonprofit fundraising. And I'm going to stick to examples that have a really well-defined scope. So at the end of 9 weeks working together with a volunteer, just for an example, projects can take anywhere from 2 to 9 weeks usually. You will walk away with a really clear deliverable because each of these is pro bono that Taproot has seen have a real demonstrated impact on the fundraising capacity of social change organizations. And these projects are all able to be completed through Taproot's programs. So if you hang around towards the end, I can talk briefly about how you can connect with those resources. Although I encourage you to think about supporters in your own network or board members who could also potentially deliver these pro bono projects for you as well. All right, so my first pro bono example for you is from the large umbrella bucket of business development strategy. And my reason for starting here is that a fundraiser should not set your organization's business development or marketing strategy. Your business development and marketing strategies should instead inform how your organization executes fundraisers, such as Arizona Gives Day, or maybe if you do an annual giving drive towards the end of the year. Put simply, in order to fundraise well, you need to have a clear vision of how, what, when, where, and to whom you're communicating with, and the action that you're asking them to take, right? Fundraising campaigns are stronger when they're tied really securely into your overall strategies and goals for the year, so that no work that you're doing is redundant or off-brand. So since a volunteer who's worked in the private sector their entire career might not have a clear understanding of nonprofit fundraising best practices, I would say consider using their skills in really targeted ways in order to shape your overall fundraising strategy. For instance, a volunteer with a background in finance or investment could step into your organization to evaluate the pricing of your programs, the pricing of your services, products, or fundraising/sponsorship packages that you are considering pitching to local businesses in conjunction with Arizona Gives Day. And make recommendations on potential shifts that you could make to increase the revenue or sponsorship dollars that you're bringing in. So on this slide, you'll see a few examples of really discrete pro bono projects falling under business development strategy bucket, as well as some volunteer skill sets that you could be looking for to recruit and bring into your organization as you're planning the strategy of how you're approaching Arizona Gives Day. The next bucket of work that I want to talk through, because I alluded to it just a few minutes ago, is marketing planning, marketing strategy. There's a reason that the development and your marketing staff members maybe work so closely together at your nonprofits, or frankly, they might even be the same person. I would encourage you, raise your hand in the chat if you are covering development and you also do marketing and communications responsibilities. That is certainly not uncommon and with the nonprofits that Taproot works with. It's not uncommon at our organization too. We're a relatively small nonprofit ourselves. Yeah, I see Jennifer's chiming in. So fundraising, whether it's grant writing, pitch decks for major donors, annual galas, or even social media crowdfunding, involves a tremendous amount of communications and marketing work. So I have a few thoughts here on how volunteers could help with the strategy and planning piece through really discrete projects that would take from 2 to, I would say the things on this slide, probably 2 to 6 weeks to knock out. So my first tip here is before creating before beginning the creation of all of the disparate pieces of your fundraiser, I consider creating a fully fleshed out communications plan that describes what you want to accomplish with your fundraiser's communications, ways in which those objectives can be accomplished, the audience of your communications, the tools and timeline for which you'll use to accomplish those objectives, and then how you will evaluate the success of your campaign. So since you know you're going to be executing your campaign that first week of April in honor of Arizona Gives Day, work backwards to set up that timeline and identify which tools, which staff resources, board resources, or additional volunteer resources you'll need to bring in at each stage of that process. So definitely always recommend a comms plan. That's a great example of a project you can link up with a volunteer to help you flesh out and work through together. And another great piece about that is once you've created a communications plan for one fundraising drive, you could likely use that as a template for other fundraisers or other marketing pushes going forward. So that could become kind of like a checklist for you and your team going forward. So building even more team capacity rather than just creating something for 2022 Arizona Gives Day. My second thought here is that another marketing strategy, marketing planning piece that could be key for your campaign, depending on what you're envisioning for it, could be a public relations plan, a PR plan. Get people talking about your organization in the best possible way. A PR plan identifies an organization's communication goals for target audiences, and then develop strategies to achieve those objectives, right? So this plan could include recommendations for any number of tactics, including a PR calendar, maybe relevant media lists if you're trying really hard to reach local media outlets. It could even involve coaching on media relations or creating news releases, speeches, etc. And then my final marketing planning recommendation for you would be to work with a social media specialist to create a distinctive social media strategy for your fundraising objectives. So I don't think it's a surprise to anyone, these days, especially, people are really living online. And so social media is our opportunity as nonprofits to make these one-on-one and really personal connections with audience members. It's a huge area of opportunity, but social spaces are really crowded, and all of us on the line are likely wearing 10 different hats at our organization. So if you're already handling marketing and development, adding social media on top of that can feel a little bit daunting, a little bit overwhelming, which makes it a really great area to potentially bring an outside pro bono consultant in to assist you there. When thinking about using volunteer support for social media, I would say it's really crucial for your organization to have a clear vision of what goals you're using social media to accomplish, and how executing your campaign on social media will help you drive towards those goals. For instance, I, as a follower of pages, get really frustrated and frankly a little bored when all I see from a nonprofit organization is our fundraising please. If that's all I'm seeing day after day, I as an audience member am losing sight of the mission and the work that you're doing, and the stories and the people it's impacting. And so that's why I really encourage you to go into social media projects with a clear sense of how you're using those channels to reach and then move audience members, because fundraising should just be a piece of a well-balanced diet of social media content. It shouldn't be the only thing you're putting out onto your social channels. It's just a piece of the pie. So definitely keep that in mind. And that's coming from, I've actually volunteered as a social media volunteer a few times through Taproot's programs. So can really reiterate this point, is that volunteers should not be the ones to dictate what your goals for social media or PR or communications or just marketing in general. We shouldn't be the ones to dictate what your goals should be. Volunteers can help your team figure out what those objectives could be, and help you set a baseline of, hey, this is what other organizations in your space are doing. We can help you get to those goals, but we can't be the ones to dictate them for you. So you do want to have that clear sense before entering into pro bono engagements. So ask yourself some questions, why are we wanting to get deeper into email marketing? Or why are we wanting to launch an Instagram page? Is it to reach more supporters? Is it to get folks engaged in our programs? Is it to activate potential business sponsors in our area? Your volunteers will want answers to those questions as they formulate these different strategy and planning pieces. All right, so my next piece here is I'm shifting from broad strategy to a much more specific element of campaign building, being graphic design. So, you could use graphics to really capture the attention of potential supporters through marketing materials that highlight your mission and the impact that you're creating. So think about as you're planning for Arizona Gives Day, think through, do we need a package of social media graphics? Do we need a program logo that we can use throughout the campaign? Do we need a new brochure? Are we going to be handing things out in person and maybe we want some printed materials? Do we need some fresh email templates or a one-pager? All of those are really amazing examples of discrete, well-scoped pro bono projects that you can work with a volunteer who is skilled in graphic design to knock out really high quality outcomes for you. And these projects usually only take a couple of weeks, but your nonprofit can immediately use those to tell your story in a more visually appealing way that really captures folks' attentions and brings in financial support. So I have a few other examples of kind of where you might be able to use graphic design, working with a volunteer to knock out things like designing a landing page for your website related to your fundraiser, maybe designing swag or merchandise that you're giving out at different levels of giving to Arizona Gives Day donors. Things like a pitch deck, which really relates back to that business development strategy project that we were talking through earlier. Does your strategy involve talking to local businesses or your corporate partners or foundation partners? It's always great to have a really appealing, visually stunning pitch deck that you can send them in advance of any conversation that you're going to have with them. My next example here is another example, something super tactical to help you build out and execute those pieces of your campaign, being copywriting. So does your organization need compelling messaging that communicates your work and community impact to potential or existing funders or supporters? Copywriting projects can really help you develop the messaging and stories that will resonate with your target audience through your website or email or social media and beyond. So even though the volunteer skill set list is a little shorter on this slide, copywriting can span very different areas of your development, marketing, and communications work. So your organization could work with a volunteer to draft emails for your campaign, could also work on website copy or key messages, kind of an elevator pitch for your organization, or your social media drafts. I've seen nonprofits work with volunteers just saying, I need 20 Facebook posts that I can pull from and use during this campaign, but also throughout the year. I just need an evergreen stash of posts to pull from. Can you help me draft those? And a copywriter can come in and in a couple weeks deliver that for you. My next example for you here is around tech infrastructure. So I know this is an area where I occasionally hear a note of surprise when I mention that IT and tech professionals can actually play a big role in expanding a nonprofit's ability to fundraise well. But this can actually be one of the more cost-saving and impactful forms of fundraising capacity building that I've talked about thus far. So I want to unpack that a little bit. A successful fundraising campaign will, one, activate existing supporters, and two, attract new ones to your cause. So that means a couple of things. One being your fundraising campaign is going to bring a lot of traffic to your website. So making sure that the quality and impact of your work is well represented on that website is key to converting these web visitors into donors. So you want to make sure it's easy for your community members to figure out how they can take action to support your cause. So by working with a web developer or a user interface expert, which is sometimes referred to as UI or UX, your organization can really optimize the layout, appearance, and content on your website to maximize the results of your fundraising efforts. I would say a massive heads up on these types of pro bono projects. Begin them well in advance of any large fundraising push for it to be effectively able to boost your efforts. So we may be a little bit past the point where web development can really have a huge impact for this year's Arizona Gives Day, but I would say keep it in mind if you're doing any a Giving Tuesday later this year, end of the year, like annual giving push, or next year's Arizona Give Day campaign. Think about how you could optimize your website experience for donors as they're visiting. And then the second thing a successful fundraising campaign means as it relates to IT, you're activating existing supporters and developing new relationships. So you need an efficient way to track all that data. So optimizing your customer relationship management database, your CRM, can help improve your ability to efficiently maintain and create relationships with supporters. So then you're able to build on that success of one fundraiser, gala, auction, etc., by creating long-term relationships with those individuals. So you'll see a few examples listed here, things like a CRM assessment and recommendations, bringing in a volunteer to just dig through, hey, like, what do we need in terms of data capture on our program participants or sponsors? How can we better keep track of them? And what's out there in the field that fits our price point or is free for nonprofits to use that we could potentially implement at our organization? So a volunteer can actually do that assessment, make those recommendations for you. And then they can help with things like training to get your staff ready to use that system going forward, or even set up the system in the first place. And then of course, things like web development and user interface designer listed here as well for your web page. And then moving on to this last bucket of fundraising project recommendations to work with volunteers to complete. This is a really big one. There are a lot of possibilities here under the umbrella bucket of digital marketing. So I'll cover some of the most common pro bono projects that I've seen here at Taproot. The first of which, Google Ads. So a Google Ads project will help your nonprofit really maximize the benefits of an advertising grant on Google throughout your fundraising campaign. So leading up to that first week in April and all of the weeks after. This project can really review your nonprofit's targeted audiences and marketing tactics to write copy that has the right keywords that get your website noticed by potential supporters. Another digital marketing project I recommend to folks would be under website application development. This project is much more specific than general web development that we talked about on the last slide. This helps you add a new feature to an existing website or to troubleshoot a functional issue that you're having with navigating or managing your site. So it's really specific in scope. It's fixing or updating or adding one specific thing, one specific feature. So for instance, adding a feature that is able to track newsletter signups on your site in your CRM system, such as Salesforce, or making it possible to add in a fundraising widget to the homepage of your site. So that would be an example of a website application addition. And these projects typically are able to take place on a much quicker timetable. So you would still have time to complete something of this nature before April, the first week of April. And then last recommendation I'd call out here is content strategy. So your site may have some awesome fundraising landing pages and amazing stories of community impact, but if you haven't invested in search engine optimization, you may not be getting noticed by people who are surfing Google looking for information on organizations or causes like yours. So by working with a volunteer skilled in content management and search engine marketing, they can assess your current site content, the great stuff you already have. They can look at the keywords that you're already using, and they can make recommendations and quick fixes on where you can improve so that your website can start creeping up that Google results page. So again, another way, kind of low-hanging fruit way to make the most of the content you already have available, just by leaning on some expertise from volunteers. But again, lots of other ideas on this slide, so encourage you to dig through it when we send this information out later. And I'm also going to be including, I'll send over Karina a link to a catalog of fundraising related projects, which has a lot of great things that we've covered, some of them in today's presentation, but there's lots of other great ideas in there as well about ways you can work with volunteers to help with your campaign efforts. So the examples we just walked through, it's certainly not an exhaustive list of what's possible through Pro Bono. So at this point, you may be wondering, okay, my organization has needs in this area, but also this area and this one. How do I know if that's a good fit for Pro Bono, and kind of how do I stack them up against each other and prioritize one or the other? So I want to get into that a little bit. And as I cover some of these best practices, I'm really curious to hear from you all. Karina, I'm wondering if we could please launch that poll for folks. Really curious to hear which area of fundraising you're most interested in finding volunteer support for, especially after we just walked through some of those examples in business development, strategy, copywriting, digital marketing, etc. So definitely answer that poll. Let me know where your heads are at. And as you do that, I'm going to keep working through these slides. So before jumping in and requesting Pro Bono for all the things, we really recommend getting strategic about your fundraising to-do list, because Pro Bono is amazing for many reasons, but I want to be totally candid that it isn't always going to be the perfect match for all of your organization's needs. So with that in mind, how will you know if it's a good fit? And so I always turn back to these 4 tests for great Pro Bono, kind of like screening tests for that to-do list of yours. So the first screening test that you're going to want to use is scope. How big is this project? How well defined is the end product that I want out of this project? So this is not to say that you can't have big projects. I've seen many nonprofits get entire websites built pro bono, entire business development strategies developed or created. But it just means you have to have a very specific outcome or end goal in mind. So I would really recommend, if you don't have the knowledge on your team or your that staff expertise, on hand in something like web development or marketing planning, that's a really great example of maybe you should have a quick call with an expert in that area, or try and bring in a resource in that area to help you walk through what even project planning for that is going to look and feel like. You don't know what you don't know. And so if no one in your organization is a web developer expert or a designer or a marketer, bring in someone who is, who can help you, get set up for success there and help you figure out if the scope of a project might be too big for a volunteer, and it might need to be done by a staff member, a board member, or a paid consultant instead. So Taproot actually has an option for like 1-hour consultation calls, and they're called sessions. That could be a really good fit for this, but I can talk about that a little bit more later if people are interested in that or have any questions. So if your need will make a manageable project with a clear end outcome that's well-defined, you can go ahead and check off the scope test and move on to the second test, which is knowledge transfer. Are you confident that you and fellow team members can and will transfer the information and materials to the volunteer that they will need to complete the project successfully? So to put this into context, I once volunteered on, or I signed up to volunteer with a nonprofit who did not have a social media presence. They wanted to kind of launch their presence on Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as Instagram. So they're asking me to build out a launch strategy and develop some initial content for them. I ran into some roadblocks on that project as the volunteer because I requested materials from that nonprofit, such as, do you have any messaging that you like to use? Do you have any brand guidelines or imagery that I can utilize in these marketing? Do you have any end goals? Who are you trying to reach through social media? What actions are you trying to get them to take? And I did not get the materials or information that I needed from the nonprofit in order to move my segments of the project along. So it extended the project. It should have just taken 4 to 5 weeks to complete. And instead, it took months to complete because the nonprofit was not ready to deliver that knowledge transfer. They didn't have those materials ready, or they weren't willing to share them up front. And so it didn't set me as the volunteer up for success there. So for certain projects, you won't need as much knowledge transfer available as others. Things like photography or videography for a fundraising campaign, like video editing for a fundraising campaign, they don't need as much knowledge transfer. However, something like an email marketing strategy or a social media plan, they're going to need a bit more because they want to really understand the essence of what you want to capture, how you want to tell that story, and the resources that you have available to execute on those strategies, right? So when you look at your list of marketing needs that you're considering using Pro Bono for, are you confident that you can and will transfer the required information? How is that going to work virtually? Because if you're working with these volunteers remotely, that needs to factor into how this information is going to be shared. So are you going to be relying on board members to share that info or team members? How's that going to play out? And so that brings us to our next screening test, which is board and staff readiness. Does your organization really want this pro bono project to happen, or is it just you that wants this? And this is a really important item to consider because several folks from your nonprofit may need to be involved in order to make a pro bono project a success. So if you as an executive director really want to try crowdfunding for this year's Arizona Give Day, but your marketing director does not think it's a priority, that's a huge red flag. So only choose to invest time planning for and managing pro bono that has buy-in from around your organization. That way you can really ensure successful implementation of what you and your volunteer partner create. It's kind of the worst possible scenario is that your volunteer spends weeks of their life creating and delivering this really beautiful outcome for you, and then it sits on the shelf because your organization was not ready to actually use it. And so that volunteer's generosity and expertise just wasn't leveraged in the way it should have been. And so my last test that I would share with you is around urgency. So if the need is urgent, meaning the deadline's coming up incredibly quickly, and very, very bad things will happen directly as a result of this project not happening, then do not use pro bono to fill that need. So here's the worst possible project scenario is if your nonprofit is relying on a virtual fundraising gala to bring in 100% of your revenue for the year, and you bring in a pro bono event planner the week before the gala is supposed to happen. Pro bono is an awesome resource for many reasons, but one of the things it's not great at is when there is an absolute deadline that's coming up very quickly, and there is a tremendous amount on the line for your organization. You have to remember that when we're thinking about volunteers and pro bono consultants, people are more often than not juggling many things, and life can sometimes get in the way. I don't know about you, but I've had 3 meetings this week get canceled with folks from in my organization and outside of my organization because they've gotten COVID. So we have to be really, really thoughtful and respectful of our volunteers' times and be mindful of what your deadlines are. And if bringing in a volunteer versus bringing in a paid contractor that you can get a signed legal agreement with, I will have this work completed by X date, or having someone on staff be accountable to that, you have to determine what's going to be the best fit for these specific projects on your list. So pro bono projects typically get done on a bit of a slower timeline than in-house or paid consultancy work. So look at your list. If your project has an absolute deadline and it's coming up really quickly, cross it off your list because it's not going to be a great fit for pro bono. But if your deadline has some flexibility, then it would pass the urgency test. Another thing that I just drew up for you all as it relates to Arizona Gives Day is a bit of a pro bono timeline. I know we're a little past January, but you've already done some of that great campaign planning on your end, and you're a step ahead by attending this presentation and some of the other great marketing resources that I know Karina dropped into the chat. So take those plans, and into February and March, you can actually work on implementing them and executing them with volunteer partners or your own in-house resources. So again, look through this slide. We'll include it, or it's included in the recording. And also I'm happy to share the slides after the event as well, but hopefully this timeline gives you a good sense of where certain projects or where pro bono could really fit into your planning, but also evaluation of your Arizona Gives Day campaign. And then super quickly, and then I want to make sure we jump into questions. You know, now that you have clear examples of how professionals from the business world can help build the capacity of your fundraising efforts, if you're wondering, how do I find someone with the right skills to get this project done well? That's where Taproot can help you out. So just super quickly, I'm just going to share this slide on Taproot Plus, which is our organization's completely free of cost, nonprofit and volunteer matching platform. It's designed to be really flexible so that any nonprofit across the United States, it doesn't matter how big you are, how many staff members you have, how long you've been around, we are free for everyone, open access for everyone, and you're able to connect with skilled business professionals from across the country. And again, it's completely free to use. It's really our way of scaling up the pro bono movement and breaking down barriers to who can access resources. So currently, we're open to registered nonprofits, public schools, fiscally sponsored social good organizations across the US, as well as some other international regions as well. And we have around 85,000 total volunteers. So there's no limit to the number of staff members at your nonprofit who can have an account on Taproot Plus. So feel free, forward this information to a colleague who could also benefit from virtual volunteer support. I know we talked a lot about fundraising related projects today, but keep in mind, you know, we've got finance folks and data and HR. So if there's other organization or other people around your organization who could benefit from projects in other areas, definitely send them our way and we're happy to help. So to get started, all you really need to do is pull up a browser and head over to taprootplus.org. That URL is up on your screen now, but I think we can also include it in the follow-up email. And you'll have to tell us a few details about your organization. You have your EIN handy, have your mission statement handy. But then after that simple sign up process, you can start posting requests for a skilled volunteer support. And I promised I would touch on really quickly kind of the options for support, because I mentioned one of them earlier, which was a consultation call. So a consultation session is a 1 hour, one-time call with a subject matter expert to talk about a particular need or to get really specific, immediate problem solving and solutions for an issue you're facing, or brainstorm ideas with a third-party expert. So I can share, I've done a few sessions from both a nonprofit capacity and as a volunteer. Like I said, Taproot's a nonprofit, so I try and practice what we preach and use pro bono when we can. One recent example we used a session for was, we use Salesforce as our CRM but we do not have a Salesforce expert on staff. So when something glitches with our Salesforce account, or we're not sure how to do something, we request a session and link up with a Salesforce volunteer who we can screen share with and kind of walk them through the challenge we're facing and get their immediate suggestions for problem solving. I've also used sessions just to brainstorm. Like, hey, I just started this new role and I would really love your ideas around volunteer recruitment and retention. Like, what could we be doing better? What have you really loved from other organizations? What have you done from an employee recruitment or retention perspective that maybe we could use on the volunteer side of things? So I really love sessions. I think they're a great, like, super flexible way to find support. So again, thinking back to what we talked about earlier, if you're facing a challenge like with marketing planning, strategic planning, web design, building a budget, something that maybe you don't have the expertise on staff for, that could be a great way to connect with an expert on that topic and just talk through, how do I even approach this challenge? Like, where do I even start? How can I break this down maybe into additional pro bono projects? Or projects in-house or with staff members or with paid contractors I can bring in? What would their suggestions be? And then, of course, you have the option to request projects as well. Projects can be anywhere from 2 to 9 weeks long. Typically, a volunteer sharing around 3 to 5 hours of their time with you each week. And these things could be updating HR policies, doing a tech assessment for your organization, or designing social media graphics. We talked about that one earlier. So really, it's all customizable. It's depending on your needs. So be very clear, specific with what you want. Show passion and excitement for the work that your volunteer partner will be completing for you. And demonstrate readiness. You know, how are you going to implement the great project or the great outcome that volunteer creates for you? All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop talking so that other folks have a chance to jump in if they have any questions, comments. I'm here to be a resource for you, so let me know what you're interested in hearing more about.
Feel free to unmute yourself and just ask the question. You don't have to type it into the chat. Kimberly, I just wanted to say thank you for providing just additional commentary about how to use your services. Obviously, for today, we were talking about Arizona Gives and how you could use it, but Arizona Gives is just one of potentially your many fundraising events, and it's just one thing on your social media that you're going to be talking about. So if you're really in need of someone, for instance, to help you plan out your social media and what that content should be, not just for Arizona Gives, but going, into the rest of the year, Taproot could help you do that. So while Arizona Gives could be a component potentially of that, it could also be something where you say, you know what, I don't have enough time. I really am going to work on this in the summer in preparation for future Arizona Gives or future fundraising, et cetera. So while, again, we're talking about Arizona Gives today and how you can use that, we know time is a little tight on that, but, think broader is, I guess, what I would tell everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. And so if I was going to make some suggestions about projects that you do still have enough time to, I think, successfully link up with a volunteer, whether it's from Taproot's network or your existing network of support, because pro bono requests, this is something you could put out to your own social media network or through email to your existing volunteer pool. This is not something you necessarily have to use Taproot for. Like, leverage people in your own network as well, because you never know, they could be waiting for this really unique way to support your organization. So some specific project examples that you still have oodles of time to complete before this year's Arizona Gives would be things like graphic design. Graphic designers are very accustomed to working on like short-term contract basis. So they can usually turn around projects fairly quickly in just a matter of a couple of weeks, as long as you're responsive with feedback. Same with copywriting, especially if you keep your copywriting requests like really discreet and focused. So bring in a copywriter to update like website messaging, or to draft 2 email please that will be going out to your audiences. Avoid bringing in a copywriter who's going to be doing everything, because that means the project is going to drag on and on. But instead, think really specifically about what that volunteer will be knocking out for you as it relates to Arizona Gives. So graphic design, copywriting. I would also say like email marketing, creating like an email communications plan, how that's going to wrap into your social media or your web efforts, or any videos that you're posting, things like that. There's still time to do the comms planning side of things as well. Any other questions I could answer for folks?
While we're waiting to see if there are any last minute questions, I just wanted to drop in this link for our feedback survey, excuse me, for this session. This would be really great for the Alliance as well as our funders and Kimberly, so we can continue improving on these trainings that we're offering for everyone. And if you fill this survey in within a week of today, you could enter to win $25 off any Alliance event through the end of the year. And just reminding everyone, we will be sending a copy of the slide deck and a recording and the chat transcript tomorrow as well. So keep an eye out for that. Right.
I think everyone was eating their lunch and now they're tired from before, but if there's no other questions for today, Kimberly, I'm sure can help answer them. She's given you information on how to get in touch with them. And Karina will likely be sending out the recording as well as the slide deck for you for reference tomorrow. So we'll let everyone get done early.
Great.
All right.
Go turn on the Winter Olympics.
Yeah.
Bringing it back. But it was so nice connecting with everyone. And yeah, don't be a stranger. I'll share my contact info with Karina so she can include that in the follow-up note.
Perfect. All right. Have a good one. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.